You've heard it said that today is the first day of the rest of your life. Our guest today would agree. In fact, he says every day is day one for a leader. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to talk about leadership, teamwork, organizational culture, and human potential with experts from every walk of life. Your host is Kevin Eikenberry, a best-selling author and leadership thought leader for 25 years. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's book, The Long Distance Leader: Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. Order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/book. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Welcome, everybody, to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We're here with another episode. Today, we have a Canadian. Our guest today is Drew Dudley, and let me tell you about Drew, and then we'll dive in. Prior to founding Day One, Drew spent 8 years as the director of one of Canada's largest leadership development programs at the University of Toronto. He's wearing his Maple Leafs hat today, and served as the national chair of Canada's largest post-secondary charity, which mobilized 35,000 volunteers to annually support the work of Cystic Fibrosis Canada. He has spoken to over 250,000 people on 5 continents, been featured on the Huffington Post, Radio America, Forbes.com, and TED.com, where his TED Talk has been voted one of the 15 most inspirational TED Talks of all time. Time, Business Insider, Inc. magazines have all included his talk on their list of speeches that will make you a better leader, and I agree. Drew's clients have included some of the world's most dynamic companies and organizations, including McDonald's, Procter & Gamble, JP Morgan Chase, Hyatt Hotels, the United Way, and over 75 colleges and universities. He has a brand new book that's recently been published. It is titled, This is Day One, a Practical Guide to Leadership That Matters. We're going to talk about that and a lot more. Drew, welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be here, eh?
Hey, now, yeah, I know. Now we all know he truly is a Canadian. I was thinking about all the firsts on this podcast. I don't immediately remember another Canadian. And now, of course, I'm going to have guests. I'm going to have listeners say, Kevin, what about so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so? But I'm going to say as of this moment, I think, Drew, you're the first.
That's excellent. And let me say to all of your American fans and listeners that we come in peace. And it is all good. I think we're still friends. I don't necessarily.
We are, as far as I'm concerned. I have lots of friends and clients in Canada, and I'm glad to have you here. So one of the things I think is interesting always, and there's a little bit of this in the bio that I just read, Drew, but tell us a little bit about your path or your journey to getting to where you are, running your business, writing this book. Just tell us a little bit about the backstory.
Yeah, I think when you talk to people, I found, because my job is really to gather and share stories and insights. And what I found is when you talk to people who love what they do, you often find that they have no idea or they had no plan to get to where they are. And I'm no different. I was a really good student in high school. And if you're smart and you get good grades and you don't like science, you go to law school. That was just what I thought with the way things worked. And so that was my plan. And then I went off to university and quickly discovered that I didn't so much like commenting on the world or studying the world as much as doing things. And getting involved in a lot of charity work played a big role in that, particularly a charity here in Canada, Students Fighting Cystic Fibrosis. And that really got me energized about doing things and mobilizing people together. And that led to a whole different career path. It led me to start talking about those experiences, trying to mobilize young people, until someone at the University of Toronto spotted me at a couple of presentations and sat me down and said, we really like you to run our leadership development program. Never done it before. And I spent about 8 years building that program, working with amazing young people and sort of talking and honing the process that's in the book. And the students are really featured prominently in the book as a result, because they played a big role in starting to create this. But as what I did at the university, with theoretical leadership and what was happening in my life started to come together, this day one leadership approach took shape. And, after a TED Talk went viral in 2010, the demand to come out and share that idea spread beyond the universities and led to what I'm doing now. So that's, God, I guess 8 years ago and something like 1,000 speeches ago, to go out and talk about this idea. So it was never planned. I never would have dreamed this when that kid left high school.
Well, I think that's true for most people. And that's one of the reasons I wanted you to share the story for all of our benefit. So you've now mentioned it 2 or 3 times, and I mentioned it briefly in the introduction. You mentioned the viral TED Talk, one of the most inspiring TED Talks of all time, apparently. Very cool thing to be able to say.
Yeah.
And that TED Talk is about what you call the Lollipop Moment. So you've hinted at it and I've hinted at it. So why don't you just tell everybody what the Lollipop Moment is?
Sure. It's you can find the Lollipop Moment online if you want the full version. Here is the Reader's Digest condensed version.
Yeah, that's right. We don't need the full version because they can go get the polished version, right? So
you know what? I'll be straight up, and I want to do this because I think part of leadership is acknowledging this. You know what? That version isn't very polished. If you go online, ladies and gentlemen, I still wince when I look at it because I was so scared and so nervous, and I talk so fast. But basically, a lollipop.
Well, hold on. So stop right there. I got to stop right there. So having coached lots of speakers over the course of my career, both professional speakers, but also lots of professionals who had to give speeches. No one else clearly sees what you see in that one. And I know you probably did it better, but it really doesn't matter if it gets to the audience, right? Our view of it is never the one that matters the most.
Yeah, and that's it too. It's just the fact that people still send me notes about it. And the basic idea is this: a lollipop moment is when unrecognized leadership is recognized. And a big premise of my work is that the vast majority of leadership on the planet comes from people who don't see themselves as leaders. And most of moments of leadership in our lives go by unrecognized. And what happened in this moment is a girl came up to me and told me the story of the first time that she ever met me. And it had happened 4 years earlier. And apparently she was standing in line with her parents, terrified on her first day of school, so convinced she couldn't do it that she had decided to quit. And right before she told her parents to take her home, I guess I walked up with this bucket full of lollipops that I was using to promote that charity. And I guess I turned to the guy next to her and told him, the woman next to you is beautiful. And you got to stand next to her for 2 hours. You should break the ice. You should give her this lollipop. And when he did, and she took it because she just felt bad for him, everyone was staring at him, I guess I turned to her parents and said, it is her first day away from home. And she is already taking candy from a stranger. And I guess people lost it. And she said, in that moment, when everybody was laughing, something changed. And I never did quit. And you've been an incredibly important person in my life. And I had to tell you that. And
you had never met her except for that time.
And I don't remember that. And here's the thing, though. She told me this. She said, one more thing you should know. I'm still dating that guy 4 years later. And then a year after that, I got an invitation to their wedding. Like, she married that dude. And I don't remember it. You know, the biggest moment of leadership in my life, maybe, and the biggest moment you have on another person, you don't even remember it. And that, to me, sort of encapsulates the type of leadership that we're all doing every day and we're just dismissing as something other than leadership. And that one story is the way I've always illustrated to individuals that we need to reframe how you see leadership so you can more consciously create moments like that instead of accidentally like I did.
So okay, first of all, I've heard the story before, and what I don't know is, did you go to the wedding?
That gets asked more often.
Geez, here I was trying to be clever.
But no, here's the thing. I didn't. I had a speech that day. I couldn't go. And the fact is, I didn't know who it was. Like, think about it. You just get a wedding invitation in the mail. And so I called the number on it to say, whoever was supposed to get it, I wanted them to actually get it. And they're like, no, I'm the lollipop girl. And all of a sudden I realized who she was because I didn't know their names. And I couldn't go. And I often get asked, do you know what happened? And I don't. We lost touch. And in some ways, it's like one of those things in life that you kind of don't want to know, because right now that the impact they have is perfect. And if I found out like their marriage dissolved, I couldn't tell the story anymore. So I don't know what happened, but there are people who come into our lives just for a moment, and have such a profound impact. And that's all that the relationship should be. And we have to be okay with that. And the thing is, we can be that for other people as well. In just a moment, we can create impact, the likes of which friendships and family can do in a lifetime. We can do that in these one moments.
So you've said a couple of times now, Drew, that we need to redefine what we mean by leadership. So talk about how you would urge us to define it. I mean, we're on a podcast today called the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. How would you define, or how would you encourage us to rethink what leadership is?
Yeah, I think, what's remarkable about leadership is how easily we ignore it. And, I'm from the education system. And so I know how we teach it, and how we teach things to young people influences how they think of it for the rest of our lives. And how we think about leadership was influenced by how we were taught. When you want to teach somebody a concept when they're young, you give them examples. And if you think about the examples that you were given, like they were all giants, like they were presidents and scientific groundbreakers and people who conquered empires. And we became convinced, because those were the examples that were used, that leaders looked a certain way, that leaders talked a certain way, and that they acted a certain way. And for most of us, we don't see ourselves in that. And when you use people like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk as our examples, and that's what kids are being taught today, ultimately, yeah, you can look up to those people. People do, but we don't see ourselves in those people. And as a result, there's this wedge that's driven between our own identities and the concept of leadership. And when I say we want to redefine it, I want to start recognizing that because we don't see ourselves as leaders, because we think that leadership is something bigger than us and beyond us, and it's all about things that change the world and money and titles, etc. What happens is we let most of the moments of leadership in our lives go by uncelebrated and unrecognized. And the stuff that we celebrate, that's the stuff that we get driven to do every day. Like if things that you do get you pats on the back and get celebrated, then you do them more often. And we're just letting these moments of compassion and generosity and impact that all of us are capable of, we let them go by because we evaluate leadership over blocks of time. Like, what have I achieved and acquired over the last year, 5 years, or my lifetime? And really what my work is about, what the book is about, what the day one approach is about, is saying we're going to evaluate leadership on a daily basis. Were you a leader today? And if you were, give yourself credit for it.
Awesome. We're talking about the new book. This is Day One, A Practical Guide to Leadership That Matters, with Drew Dudley. And he's just told us the core of the book. So say a little bit more about the Day One approach. You just hinted at it. Say a little bit more.
Sure. I think what's interesting about the Day One approach is it's kind of a combination of what you go at your university and you're talking about leadership theory, right? And theory is the word you add to interesting things to make them boring. And what I really, all right,
everybody, that was worth it. I always say during every episode, there's one moment that makes it worth watching / listening. And that was it. Theory, say it again. The theory is the thing you add to something interesting, boring.
Theory is the word you add to things that are interesting to make them boring. Like, I look at it this way. Pizza is awesome. Pizza theory is incredibly unsatisfying. So, you gotta understand how leadership has been understood and explained and studied throughout history. Yeah, that's important. But how does that actually apply to the lives of these young people who are in front of me? And as I started to have experiences in my life, and a big part of what drove Day One, if you wanted to sort of break it down, is this. I'm a recovering alcoholic. And when you enter recovery, you learn that if you don't want to have a drink for the rest of your life, you have to choose not to have a drink today. And then you have to treat every day for the rest of your life as if it is the first day of your recovery. Because if you screw up on day one, everybody screws up on day one. There's an inherent forgiveness to it. But if you've done it for 25 years, you can't let that allow you to become complacent. There are still these non-negotiable things that have to happen. In that case, for me, it's not drinking. Leadership's the same way. Anything you want in the world is the same way. On day one, you have to say, these are the non-negotiable behaviors that will lead me to what I need, whether it's the weight loss or sobriety, mental, physical health, leadership. And then you say, I treat every day like it's day one, which isn't to say you restart every day on day one. Like, it's more of a recommitment. So every day one you have builds on the one before. So let's say you're on your 1000th version of day one. That you're going to be capable of so much more, and you're going to have more responsibility, and you're going to have more benefits. But on day 1000 of day one. But ultimately, there are certain things that still have to happen, just like it's the first day. And
Because
that's
if
the
they
idea.
don't, you don't have all those benefits.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you've been a leader for your every day for the last 5 years. All that really matters is if you're a leader today. And I think what that approach does is it reminds us that leadership isn't something like a military rank. Like once you get it, you never have you don't lose it. Like once you're a colonel, even if you stop doing whatever it was that got you there, unless you do something that busts you down, right? But
Right.
leadership's the same way. Like just because you've done all this in your past and someone gave you the title of leader or president or whatever, it doesn't mean you can just stop having a positive impact and trying to find a way to empower other people and grow as a person. Every day you say, if this was my first day, if I went back to day one and I could build myself into the person and the leader that I want to be, what would I start with? And then you treat every day like that. That's how I lost 100 pounds. It's how I've maintained sobriety. It's how I continue to do the things that keep me mentally and physically healthy. Every single day, I simply say, what are the things that a leader would do today? I don't worry if I did them yesterday, and I don't worry about doing them tomorrow. What do you do today?
Because all I got is today anyway, right? That's all we've all got. So in the book, you talk about 6 core values. And I don't want you to give the whole book away because we want everyone to make sure they get a copy of the book. But can you give us a little bit about that? How can these values improve what we're doing every day?
Yeah, well, I give 6 examples, but I was just talking about how on day one you have these certain non-negotiable behaviors you do over and over again. My argument is that those should be actions consistent with your values. The book dives into how do you figure out what your personal values are? Because what I've discovered in 15 years of doing this is that most people don't actually know what their core values are.
And if you ask them, they get all freaked out because they think they're supposed to, and they have no idea how to do it.
And you know why it is? Because we all went through an education system that taught us that you should pay the most attention to the stuff on which you're going to be tested. That's where all our attention gets drawn because that's where all the rewards are, like how you do on the tests. And since we're never tested,
that's not the way. That only happens in Canada.
Oh, really? There's no standardized testing in the US of A, eh?
I'm just teasing you.
I know. The North American education system, they're different, but ultimately that really is it, is that as a kid, you really quickly learn, I'm going to get rewarded for the tests, how I do on the tests. And as such, let's pay attention to that. But we're never tested on what are your values? Who do you want to be? It's always, what do you want to do when you grow up? And, how are you going to make decisions? So we become our own worst subject, right? And ultimately, the book says, okay, if you want to know what to do every day, like beyond everything else that you have to get done, because we all have obligations that are different every day, but the non-negotiable is you have to give yourself evidence that you have done one thing every day that's consistent with your core values. And the book helps you figure out what they are. Now, as a starter kit, as training wheels to get the process going, I've identified 6 that I find really make leaders highly effective. And they are impact and courage and growth, empowerment, class, and self-respect. And those 6 values, if you start doing something every day that lives up to the majority of them, then you're going to start to see real improvements, not only in your own life, in your own career, in your own relationships. You're going to really start feeling you're going to start having an impact on other human beings in a way that makes you realize that you matter every day. And if you think people freak out when you ask them what their values are, see what happens if you ask them, if you look them right in the eye and you say, why do you matter? Like people lose it. And they're not in they throw their hands up, but there's this terrified, glazed look that comes over their face. And that bothered me. The first person I ever asked was a student. And when I asked him, why do you matter? He just said, well, I don't yet, That's why I'm working so hard. And that's a really hard thing to hear from someone that you care about. And I realized, man, my other students felt that way. And then I realized that my friends felt that way and my coworkers felt that way. Like, we go through life in some ways thinking, I don't matter yet. That's why I'm working so hard. And if you don't feel like you matter, you don't treat other people like they matter. And so what the book really is about, what Day One Leadership is about, is at its core, really, giving yourself evidence every day that you matter. And I talk about those 6 because that's where to start. And they're important because we get educated out of a lot of them when we're young, right? Empowerment is a value that is about acting as a catalyst for the success of others. But like, how old were you before you started saying to yourself, well, why would they be grading us? Why would they be giving us grades if it wasn't so they could rank us and then make sure the people at the top got something the people at the bottom didn't get? And so we're supposed to embody this value of empowerment, which great leaders do. They make people better. And yet we get taught basically that you're competing with one another for a limited number of resources, and leadership's a tiny little club that not everybody can get into. We're taught, courage is an incredibly important value if you want to have a full life and if you want to lead yourself and others. But we get made to think that mistakes are the worst thing that you can make, because you begin everything with 100%. And then every mistake you make, you lose points.
You get some.
And the older we get, the less concerned we are with how good we are and how wise we are and how skilled we are at any given moment. And what we worry about is how few mistakes we made along the way. So values like impact and empowerment and courage and self-respect, I think they're so important because when you live them, you change yourself and others profoundly. But in many ways, these are the key values that have been educated and socialized out of us. And I think we all want to be those things, but in many ways we've been trained not to. And so we have to be conscious to bring it back. And if you make those your non-negotiables, if you go through every day and say, it's day one on my way of being a better person and a better leader. So I'm going to do one thing that embodies impact and growth and courage, empowerment, class, and self-respect. And I argue that if you do that, you are going to have a bigger impact on the people around you than any president does, than any CEO does. Like, every time we talk about leadership, we pivot to presidents and CEOs. But a president and CEO has relatively little impact on most of the people that surround you, but you do.
Right.
And let's choose
they have
that.
a very small amount of impact on a lot of people, but we can have a monstrous, this is a big part of your point, we can have a monstrous impact on a number of people that are that we interact with, whether it's in the line at the college with lollipops, or whether it's the person you're sitting next to on the airplane. I'm going to be on an airplane tomorrow, or whatever that is, right? And that's true. So you talk in the book about planning for leadership. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think to go back to the question I asked, why do you matter? And people really struggle with it. 95% of the people I ask, like, they either make up an answer or they just sort of blank and stare at me until I move on. And I realized the more I asked it why that is, and I think it's because we hope to matter and we hope to lead and we hope to make a difference in the world. And people will say that, I think because I can make a difference, or I think because I have the capacity to be a great mother, a great father. Those are the types of answers they eventually give. I think, I hope, I could be. And
I want to be, right?
Yeah. And we hope to matter and lead and make a difference. And hope, let's be straight up, hope is a wildly powerful force. But it's a terrible strategy. And so if we want to matter and we want to lead and we want to make a difference, we have to plan to do those things. And I guess the idea of planning to lead is this: the big distinction between good and great leaders. A good leader will live their values every time the opportunity presents itself. So if you're a good leader and there's an opportunity to show class, you'll seize it. There's an opportunity to show generosity, you'll seize it. Good leaders live them every chance they get. What separates the great ones from the good ones is that good leaders live their values whenever they get a chance. Great leaders create opportunities to live their values. And that's the big difference. is instead of seizing on an opportunity when you see it to live a value, you go into each day with a plan. And that's the big difference. And the way, we looked at it is we took every value and we shifted into a question. And if you answer that question somehow in the day, you'll have lived that value. And then you treat your leadership like it's a test. Every single day is day one. And you have certain things you have to do. You have to earn every new day one on the planet. Like, this is sort of how I go through life. And every day is day one, and you have to earn another day on the planet. Every new spin around the sun, you got to prove you deserve it. And you prove it by passing a test at the end of the day. The thing is, you're given the questions for the test in the morning, and they're tied to your core values, and your job during the day is to find a way to answer that question. And that's it.
The thing I like about the approach, and we need to move on. The thing I like about the approach is, of what you just said, is that everyone will talk about the need to live our values. But you're saying we got to know what they are. And second of all, you're giving us a plan and a roadmap and an encouragement, one of those values in and of itself, of how to actually live it and live it. And that, I think, is the key. So we have a section, Drew, in this show every week that we call the Fast Break. And the Fast Break is brought to you all by our new book, The Long Distance Leader. You can learn more by going to longdistanceleaderbook.com. And this is called the Fast Break. And here's the deal, Drew. I've got 1, 2, 3 words. And I'm going to say the word. I want your chance to say whatever you want to say about that word quickly, and then we'll move on to the next one. Are you ready?
Yeah, this is cool.
The first one is accountability.
Accountability. Accountability is recognizing that it's a commitment to acknowledging the things you've done right and acknowledging the things that you have done wrong. Often we equate accountability with always owning the mistakes. I think accountability is also owning the things that you do well, not boasting about them, but recognizing that you've done well. It's a commitment to taking responsibility for your actions, good and bad.
Second word, coaching.
Coaching. Coaching is a commitment to other people's success. And that could mean giving them advice. But what I found is that coaching, the first word that comes to my mind when you say coaching is questions. Leadership's too often equated with answers. Like, you got to know the answers. The best leaders, it's not about answers. It's about the absolute best questions. And coaching is, instead of saying to someone, this is how you should do it, is asking people questions that make them realize why they should do it, what they should do. And it honestly makes them realize stuff that they didn't realize they knew. That's what coaching is about. It's about great questions.
Well, then, of course, when you say, I'm looking off to the side here because I'm trying to be clever, it's not working very well. But you immediately, as soon as you say questions, I think of my good friend, Michael Bungay-Stanier, who is a Canadian and has also been on the show. So the book is The Coaching Habit, everybody. The gentleman is Michael Bungay-Stanier. I was looking to see if I could quickly find when he was on. I'm not seeing it, but you should all go back and listen to the episode I did with Michael. So third word is education.
Okay. Education. Okay. Education, our education system is the most important, empowering, liberating system that exists. It can also be the most dangerous, disempowering, and limiting system that exists. Education has to be about failure. And unfortunately, it villainizes failure in the formal education. And this is not an indictment of teachers. This is an indictment of the education system. Ultimately, education has to be about failure, and not going into failure, without recognizing potential danger. But education is about developing a healthy relationship with failure, trying things, having them not work, and then trying them again, so that you fail as many times as possible, so that finally you reach a point when failure would be really dangerous, that you no longer fail. And so I think when I hear education, I hear incredibly important, wildly empowering, and also potentially dangerous, because what the formal education system does is it cuts failure out and villainizes it. And education is failure. plan for failure, develop a resiliency to failure, and embrace its lessons. And then you're going to be educated every day of your life. That I think is what happens when I think of education.
All right. Excellent. So we've been talking with Drew Dudley, and we're talking about all sorts of things related to leadership and personal growth. And I think people would like to know what you do when you're not speaking and writing and stuff. So Drew, what do you do for fun?
Well, I am up until recently a season ticket holder of the Toronto Blue Jays. So taking friends and sitting next to them and catching up at a ball game while watching my beloved Blue Jays is a big one. I used to be really big. I used to be 300 pounds, and I have just discovered the absolute joy of getting back to physical activity. So I like walking a couple hours a day, listening to audiobooks, and doing some kickboxing at the gym. And I love going to, I'm a big musical theater fan. So I've seen the musical Hamilton 7 times. So I like being moved by other people's words. I really do. And that's why I really love listening to audiobooks, watching incredible musicals, watching, The West Wing and things that have been put where words are used to change the way you think of things. And nothing is more fun to me than being moved by somebody else's ideas. So if I can do that or sweat, count me in.
And if you could do them both at once, well, apparently listening while walking, then it's a double win. So
Yeah.
Speaking of listening to audiobooks, the question I ask every guest that I have is, what are you reading? What have you read recently? What would you want to share with folks? And I know you have something because we talked about it before that we started. So what are you reading, Drew?
I on the recommendation of a buddy of mine, when I was on a conversation with him about how lousy I was feeling, he recommended Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams by Matthew Walker, PhD. And he said, read this book, and if you're not in bed every night by 9, then you really didn't read it. And it's an analysis of what sleep is, why we do it, and the positive and negative benefits of getting enough of it. And it absolutely blew my mind. It's one of those books by a brilliant scientist, or a brilliant mind that makes it simple. And the basic idea is this: the older you get, the more you will miss the sleep you skipped when you were younger. And that, to me, and I'll tell you something, I'm in the middle of a month right now that I call my 8 and 5 month, which is 8 hours of sleep and a 5 a.m. wake up call. So you can do the math. I'm 41 years old and I'm living like a 80-year-old in bed at 8 or 9 and get up. I have never felt smarter. I have never felt more energized. My friends are commenting on the difference in me. And I'll tell you something, my friends, you don't miss anything after 9 p.m. Like, very rarely do I don't get up the next morning and people are like, holy cow, you should have seen this. No, like, all we do is watch TV. All we do is stuff that we don't necessarily need. But man, that extra 2 hours of sleep, like, it takes it to a new level. So if you're really interested in something that is a part of every one of our lives and we never really talk about, and except we're using it as like some sort of prize, which one of us sleeps the least. It's Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, PhD, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams. It's really changed the way I think about taking care of myself.
There you go. So Drew is saying nothing ever happened. You're not going to miss anything that happens after 9 p.m. And my dad used to say nothing good happens after midnight. So I guess it's, so I think he had a different purpose in mind, Drew, when he said that.
I'll be honest with you too. Like, now, because the Jays are terrible, nothing good happens after 9. Like,
yeah,
the game ends after 9. So
they're on the West Coast. Even the local games aren't over. You're not seeing any game. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to bed.
You don't have season tickets anymore. You'd be asleep during half the games. So last question for you, and the one you've probably been dying for me to actually ask, is learn more about you and your work and the book. How can people learn more?
Yeah, drewdudley.com, DREWDUDLEY.com. There you can find all of my TEDx talks. I think there's 8 of them now. You can take a look for the Lollipop Moment. You can order the book. And you know what? If you want to figure out a way to surface your own values, there's an interactive online program as well that's sort of an accompaniment to the book that allows it to be a little bit more interactive and answer some questions there too. All of that's at drewdudley.com. And I'm so excited that the book is out and those ideas are out there. Because I'll say this, most of the big ideas in the book are me passing on the stories and insights of other people. And there's only one CEO you hear from in the book. And that was important to me as a leadership book, that most of the leaders you hear from aren't the type of leaders we're taught we're supposed to listen to. And that, I'm proud of that.
And again, the book is called This is Day One, A Practical Guide to Leadership That Matters by Drew Dudley. And so now, everybody, I have a question for all of you. And that question is, now what? 30 some minutes of time with Drew, and you had the chance to listen to it while you're exercising or whatever. And yet none of it will matter if you don't take some action. So what moved you? What action do you want to take? Do you want, besides buying the book, what action did you take from this? Maybe you thought, maybe you're thinking differently about theory now. Maybe you're thinking differently about hope now. Maybe you want to take some action around your values. My challenge to you is to take action on something that you got today. So Drew, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. It was a great value to have a chance to chat with you today. Thanks for joining us.
Kevin, I'm honored. Thanks so much.
So everybody, we're here every week. I've mentioned past episodes. There's a bunch of them, 116 or so interviews prior to Drew. And so if this is your first one, you got a lot of work to do. But hey, we're here one more time every week. Well, one more interview every week and one more short snippet with me each week as well, right here on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Join us again next week. We look forward to having you then. Thanks, everybody.